The Fab4.
Fab4.
John, Paul,
The Fab4.
George, Rico.
Fab4.
Fab4.
We have for you the Fab4.
The Fab4.
Fab4Cast.
Hello, Mr. Murray. My name is Weibo.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we had the email
Weibo,
contact.
yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Michael.
Michael. Please excuse me if I've forgotten by the time we get into the house.
Hello, I'm Anne.
Anne.
Nice
Right.
meeting you.
Do you mind if we record for our podcast?
No. You'll have to probably skip bits where I've forgotten things. Sorry. Every now and again I have to play the age card, you know.
Yeah. Comes in handy at times, I
Bloody
think.
old.
Yeah.
I don't quite know why I'm still here. And all my mates seem to have died off, you know.
Yeah. How old are you now? 80,
82.
82. Yeah, right. Oh, thank you.
Do you remember the first time you met Stuart?
Yeah, we were both in the queue to line up to register. You know, when you go to college, you arrive on the day and everyone lines up in the corridor, and then you go in to meet some of the members of staff and to make some sort of a decision about why you're there. And Stuart and I were next to each other in the queue. So you get talking and we register and we're put in the same group. I think it was group 4 with about a dozen other people. And then, of course, we were taken across to the crack and carried on our chattering and so on. Found we had quite a lot in common. I'd been at a Christian Brothers school, and Stuart had also been at a school where he was a choir boy and all these sort of things. So you think, well, at least we can get away from all that now, because the Christian Brothers were like the provisional wing of the Catholic Church teaching division. Very, very strict. If for some reason you didn't understand what was being said, you were wellied with a big leather strap.
Yeah. Oh.
And of course it was legal then. You could knock the hell out of kids and nobody seemed to care. And the same at schools. Luckily I was away from school for 2 years or 2.5 years in a sanatorium.
Yeah.
Which was absolutely wonderful. So when, of course, I eventually got out, I was released, I had a totally different outlook on life. Anyway, I'm still in the corridor with Stuart, and we're put in the same group. And the first 2 years, of course, you do a little bit of everything. So when you went, you had to be there in the morning, first thing, because there would be, say, from 9 till 11 class on drawing for life, and then there might be a class on something like lettering or all sorts of weird things, you know, each day. And then there'd be a day where you were sent out to work down in the docks or whatever else. Then you'd bring your work back and put it up for criticisms. It was a bit of an eye-opener for me, because when I was at St Edward's, I was quite good at art and got the art school, at least 2 of the art school prizes. When you get to an art school, everybody's good at art, otherwise they wouldn't be there. And all of a sudden you're just one of many.
Yeah.
And I felt even more like one of many, because I realised quite early on how good Stuart was. I mean, exceptionally
you
good.
recognized his talents.
Yes.
There was something in his work that you recognized immediately.
Yeah. It was that not just the quality of his work, but the speed that he did things.
The speed.
Yeah. I mean, he could knock out a drawing really very quickly.
And you became friends. You felt that you had a lot in common.
Yeah. Oh,
The experience you shared.
Sometimes you just take to somebody, don't you?
Yeah.
You think, I'm going to get on well with them.
Yeah.
And other people, you think, I hope I don't ever meet them again.
No.
You know.
What was it about Stuart
It's very difficult to say, isn't it? You know, there's this sort of weird thing about friendship. I suppose, in a way, Stuart's about 2.5, 3 years younger than me.
Yeah.
I'd been away from school, so all the people that I was friends with when I was at school before I went away to the sanatorium, when I got back to the year at school, had gone. They'd left. So I had no sort of close friends, and I haven't any brothers or sisters or close relatives. So I suppose I almost adopted Stuart as a younger brother, and wanted to sort of look after him like a brother, you know.
Yeah.
And can I ask you something about his character? Because in many of the pictures that we have of him, he's never smiling. He looks so serious. Was he fun to be with?
He did have teeth, so he could smile. I remember this. Yes, he was, yes. I mean, quite often he was fairly serious, particularly about his work.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I can show you some of his drawings and cartoons.
That would be great.
Have a lot of humour. You know, in the day of Thurber and the sort of strange cartoons of the late 50s and 60s were sort of a bit sort of either sarcastic or cruel. And I've got pages and pages of, these are just photocopies, of course, of his original cartoons. And some of them are sort of real nonsense and some of them are humorous. But it's interesting because Lennon also did cartoons.
Yeah.
These are a couple of his.
Yeah.
He had a very different style from...
Yeah, but again, the same humour.
Yeah.
If you remember when Stuart went to Germany, he was studying with Paolozzi. Eduardo Paolozzi was a famous English sculptor. And in 1989, when I'd been external assessor at the Royal College of Art, and they asked me would I take the job as head of holography. And I was introduced to Paolozzi. And we did have a chat about Stuart. He remembered Stuart from those days, so his impression was that had Stuart lived, he would really have gone places. Jumping back 60 years, we've just got out of the queue now and gone to the crack, and it seems that most art students who were serious had a flat with a studio in it. So by the end of the first year or the beginning of the second year, we'd persuaded our parents that we wouldn't be staying there, of course, but it would be nice to have a room where we could paint somewhere away from college or work. And we found this basement flat in 83 Fortner Street, I think it was. And it had an entrance from outside down some stone stairs. A big front room with a tiny kitchen next to it and a very large back room. So we thought the large back room, we'll put the easels there. The front room, we'll have some bits and pieces of furniture that one of the other students had given us. And a kettle, which is all you needed, and a bottle opener. So we had that not really for very long, because we decided that the front room would be better to have the easels in as well. And we go down one day and there's a noise in the back room. And we just walk through into our back room and there's a whole Irish family with about 6 kids living there. So we thought, we've come to the wrong house. But we hadn't. We went up to see the landlady and she said, oh, you didn't seem to be using that room, so I've let it to somebody else. So there was a bit of a mix-up of why our dog died, and it really wasn't anything to do with us. But we did what was called a moonlight flit. You know, we did owe a couple of weeks' rent, of course, and we left that flat. And then over that summer, what would it be, summer of 57, I can't remember what the weather was like, but I got this letter from Stuart. Dear Rod, I thought I'd let you know that I have taken a room in 12 Canning Street. It's about 20 yards from the post office, which is just on the corner by the college. It's a very nice, clean place, but the room itself is not very big. But it's furnished in a way, and light, and enough to work in. I'm moving in on Wednesday afternoon, so that if you were thinking of coming to the house during the halls, I won't be there. by any chance you have got nothing to do, you'll probably find me in the Belvedere or the Picasso or the flat. I don't know yet whether the landlady will allow parties. One of the major things that was down on the list of what or not. But there is time for that next term. The main reason I've taken this place is to take me away from the distractions of home life in which I have become overbearing recently, in order that I can get on with some serious work. So long, Stuart. So even then, he was finding it a bit hard to do work at home. And of course, we'd lost our studio. So this was the next thing. Now, of course, the main problem was that it really was very small. And it was for one. And two of us being there from time to time didn't go down well with the landlady. So I can't remember whether we were asked to leave.
But this was the first place that you two lived in, right?
This is the first proper flat.
Yeah.
The other one was really a basement with nothing in it at all. This is the first proper little flat. But we were only there a very short time. And at that time, there was a friend, and I can't remember whether it was a year above us or not, called Stan Iverson. And he lived in Percy Street at number 11. And he'd said to me that there was a flat going in number 9, and Mrs. Plant, who lived at the first house, must have been 3, go and see her. So Stuart and I went to see her and said, I believe you've got a flat. And she said, yes, it's just for one, you know. Who is it for? And Stuart said, oh, it's for me. So that flat's also all in his name, and I was the sort of not their tenant. And it was a great flat, you know, really big enough for both of us. Had a communal kitchen on the end of the first floor with a bath in the kitchen, but no water to it. And it had a little gas cooker and a sink, and a wooden board over the top of the bath so that you could actually prepare things. And there was a very, very small, dark room just before you went into the kitchen that we believe was the toilet. But none of us liked going in there because it was horrible. Wow. It was easy to go out over to the college or out for half a pint of beer and so on. So that was great. That went down well. We lived there happily for a while. Mrs. Plant used to occasionally come round for the rent, or if you didn't really want her to come round, you went and paid the rent in her house. But if you were caught out, and this would never be allowed by health and safety anymore, I wouldn't guess, because if you heard her come in and she made a noise that you recognised, I don't know whether it was jingling of money in a bag or something, you'd go up to the top flat, and there was a little cupboard in the corner of the where the top stairs ended. And at the back of the cupboard, there was a little door which opened into the next house, into their cupboard. And you could escape. Luckily, that flat was Stan Iverson's, our friend. And once you'd got into the flat and managed to work your way round, he had an old Scott motorbike that he was repairing in the top floor flat. It was a nice chap, and you could escape and then call round to see her later and say, I'm sorry I missed you, here's the rent. I can't remember how much the rent was for something like 25 shillings a week. That's like €1 now.
So this is in Percy Street?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, in Percy Street, did you invite other friends like John Lennon, or is it too...
Yeah, well, Percy Street was great for parties because the chap in the front room was a university student and the chap downstairs was either deaf or never there. So you could make as much noise as you liked. And John and numerous friends used to come round, and we'd have parties there with beer. And for some reason or other, I think cheese must have been relatively cheap then, because the only thing going was bread, cheese and beer. Mm. But, you know, you can exist on things like that quite well. The reason we were quite happy with this flat was that it was relatively tidy, it was properly furnished, and it was clean enough to invite both our mums around. and our mums came and just about passed it. You know, they didn't exactly run their fingers along to see if there's any dust on the top of the furniture, but you could see it happening in their eyes. And lots of friends called, of course, John and Cynthia and Brenda Powell and most of the people in our year and in Bill Harry's year, it was next year up, he was in with John's year, would come round. But we thought it needed modernising. We thought the old fireplace, these big old marble fireplaces, people don't want those anymore, do they? So we thought we'll take that out and we'll have a more modern fireplace with, you know, a piece of aluminium and some tiles and big opening. So then after we'd taken it out, we had to decide how to get rid of it. So we had to take it into little pieces. And Stuart then thought the furniture looked a bit old as well. It was mahogany and old-fashioned. We painted it with some sort of emulsion paint, I think, early emulsion paint, black and white stripes and circles and dots and so on. And we thought it looked wonderful. Then we thought, probably not a good idea to let Mrs. Plant in, so we must always pay the rent somewhere else. Of course, we needed coal and wood. There was a lot of wood in the basement. Pieces of old furniture and things, scrap, you know, rubbish, old chair legs and stuff like that. So we thought, we're helping here, we're tidying the basement up, we can burn some of that, we could get some coal, some of it from the central heating or the heating in the art school must have been coal or coke, because there's a mountain of it in the backyard. And one of the old ladies who was the cleaner there used to leave a little cardboard box of it near the back door of the college, which we could pick up. So at least we were vaguely warm in the flat. So that went fine. Then it started that, you know, we were bringing in ladies back and wanting a bit of privacy, because there's nothing between the bed in one side of the room and the bed in the other side of the room. And I think Stuart had an old gramophone, one or two other things, and an easel, and not a lot of room. So one of us would make ourselves scarce and go to the pub for the night. And then that worked okay until, of course, John Lennon started wanting to stay with Cynthia. Another side of it before we were thrown out was I'd been to buy a tape recorder from John Lewis, and the big thing at the time, you know, reel-to-reel tape recorder. And it was that tape recorder in that front room of mine where the first John, and I remember John and Paul being there, and probably George, playing their guitars, and we made tapes on it.
So they were already there in that flat?
Yes, this would be the early part of 59. I think we'd had a party, and I woke up. I hadn't quite made it to bed. I think I was on the floor in front of the fire, which had more or less gone out. Oh, I thought, oh my God. And it was Mrs. Plant, the landlady, on a surprise visit. And she threw everybody in the house out, whether they were involved in the parties or not. We were all thrown out.
And this was before you moved to the next flat?
Before Gambian Terrace,
yeah.
yes.
But at some point in time you moved there, and that was a place where John, Paul and George, Mike McCartney maybe,
yes, Mike used to come there.
They came there frequently. Can you tell something about that place?
Sure. Okay. So we were thrown out of Percy Street, and we were given time to find another flat. I don't quite know who told us, but there was one going in Gambian Terrace, which was a whole floor on the first floor. We went round, and at this time it was in my name. It was a sort of rota system. And anyway, it worked out that if it was just Stuart and myself, we'd be paying quite a lot for it. So at the time, Diz Morris and Margaret Duxbury were wanting to get out of their flat. So they decided they would join us, and they were briefly with us. And then John wanted to move in as well.
He took the back room, I remember.
He shared the back room with Stuart. The big back room was this communal studio, the big front room was our sort of living room. That's the one that overlooked the cathedral. And I had that as a bedroom, and the small room next to it was where Diz and Ducky had. And then it was Ducky moved out, and Rod Jones moved in, and John Lennon moved in, but with Stuart in the back room. So it all worked out very well, and it was a super luxurious flat compared to the others, because it had a bath with a hot water geyser and a separate toilet that was considerably cleaner than the one in Percy Street, and a kitchen. And we had to get a gas stove, though, because there wasn't a gas stove there. But you could connect the gas stove up, which we bought, to a tap on the wall. Again, you couldn't do this nowadays. It wouldn't be legal, you know. And we all had our own shelf in the kitchen with our own tin of beans in, and dried spaghetti or whatever else we cooked.
So this was a flat where also Paul McCartney, George Harrison came?
They regularly came there, and they used to practice their music there, of course. And it was partly that got us thrown out, because not the girl underneath us who was a nurse on nights, but the ladies in the front room in Gambian Terrace who complained to the landlord, and we managed to get away with it for a while, but then, of course, it caught up with us.
You got evicted out of the Gambian Terrace because a newspaper article appeared.
Yeah.
I read the headline, which said it was a Beatnik horror.
Yeah.
Why did a journalist come to your place in the first place?
We were sitting in the crack when Alan Williams came in, and he said he'd got these few reporters, and they were looking into students' grants and how difficult it was for students to survive, and on the pittance that they had. And they were from the Empire News. The Empire News was one of the sort of middle-of-the-road papers in those days. And, of course, it turned out they were from the People, which was, scandal rag or whatever they care to call it. And they made most of it up, you know. The strange thing was, you've seen the photograph of people sitting around the back room. That back room was where John and Stuart lived. And it also had the easel, and the gramophone on the floor was one I made. And they put somewhere in one of the articles, sitting around or squatting or something derisive around a magnificent home-built hi-fi. That's 4-watt hi-fi. But they also put things around the place, made it look a bit untidy, and we fell for it, didn't we? They brought beer and stuff across from the pub. Alan Williams is in that photograph, and I'm in it. Where Stuart and John were, I'm not quite sure, but in that photograph were most of the people that were in the flat at that time, apart from Diz, who was in one of the other rooms asleep. By this time, Stuart had become the bass player, because when we were still in Percy Street, they'd come on by saying, they wanted a bass player, and I don't know how many people they asked, but they asked Stuart and I decided, yes, I wouldn't mind being a bass player. I thought, well, I'll make one. I'll make a bass. And Stuart he'd got an acoustic guitar, so he thought, well, I could probably be the bass player. This is about the time when Stuart got a painting into the John Moores exhibition, and we took half of his painting down to the agents, and then came back and took my painting down, and then came back and stopped at the crack and never got to take his other half of the painting down. However, the half painting got in and John Moores bought it. So Stuart suddenly had the money and went to Hessie's and bought a bass guitar and became the bass player. The first thing that he did was go off up to Scotland with them. Do you want to see a postcard from Scotland?
Yeah, of course.
Somewhere. That's down there. One of Stuart's paintings.
Oh, right.
I gave him 10 shillings for that, which is now 50 pence. We used to always be lending each other money. And
that's the original on the wall of yours?
That's original.
Original Stuart.
Yeah. That's one from Hamburg up there. The one on the right is from one that he did in Hamburg with Paolozzi, and his mum gave me that when he died. And the little one to the left is a little life study of his from college. As I said, that's the one from Paolozzi up there.
It's such an enormous variety in styles. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
What was his...
The one that's on the wall there of the three old people sitting around a table drinking, it's in the style of Cézanne, or, and then he did his Van Gogh style and then his Modigliani style.
What was your reaction when Stuart made this turn, being an artist, painting, and then suddenly becoming a musician? That one must have been quite a surprise for you.
It was a bit odd because although he was better at playing a guitar than I would ever have been, he wasn't really a musician. But I think he liked the idea of, on the road, and it was great to be a musician in the late 50s. So it was a bit of a romantic thing as much as anything else. And I think John was pleased that Stuart made the guitar, or bought a guitar. Yeah. Would you like to see the guitar?
That was my next question.
Okay.
You were working on the bass yourself.
Daar komt Rod aan met zijn onafgewerkte basgitaar.
I couldn't afford the strings.
Did you show it to the rest of your friends?
Yes,
to
but
John.
It was too late, wasn't it?
Yes. It was too late. Okay, because Stuart already bought his bass
before I could finish it.
Yeah.
So
it didn't come far because only the shape, but no.
I had to cut the shape out and the arm and screw it together and sand it down and so on. And then I thought, well, I could get strings and a pickup and so on, but I've never got around to it, and I still haven't finished it. There's not a lot of point finishing it now. The band's broken up,
And Stuart went to Hamburg and came back fully in love with Astrid. What were your impressions of her?
I thought she was lovely. This letter from Stuart, it's the one where he mentions that he's met a lovely young photographer girl. It's somewhere there.
Is it dated?
No.
No date on it?
We're not very good.
It says Bruno Cosme Betriebe.
Yeah.
That's like 1960 it must have been, at the end of 60. But did he bring her along to Liverpool? Or?
Yes, he came back. I was going to say before he died. Of course he'd come back before he died. Yeah, he came back. We met up in Alan Williams's Jacaranda, I could understand why he fell for her. His mum wasn't that impressed. And for some reason or other, they stayed in Alan Williams's flat in, I think it was Huskisson Street, and I saw them there as well. And then he was going to be my best man when I got married. We'd moved round to 64 Fortner Street. And then, of course, he died, didn't he? It just came as a big shock.
Were you aware of his health problems?
No. Not really. He'd always been what I thought was just awkward. He'd trip over things and bang into things. But then I haven't got a good sense of balance either, so I thought, well, isn't everybody like this? And evidently they're not. Some people have got good sense of balance. But he did stumble and fall, and whether this had anything to do with it or not. And it was very unclear at first when I went to see his mum what the results of his death was. I think it was sent over in German and somebody translated it, and it was still, what does that mean? Don't know. Still don't know. Really, I don't anyway. Somebody might.
Yeah. It's a brain hemorrhage, that's what the books say.
Yeah. So I was told by somebody who had a message to get in touch with me, I went round to see Mrs. Sutcliffe. She sort of adopted me as a sort of surrogate son.
Well, I was wondering, the news came that Stuart had died.
Yeah.
Must have been an awful day to hear it, and his body had to come back to Liverpool.
Yeah.
What do you know about those days, that week?
Well, the funeral was, you've already been up to the churchyard, and I seem to remember that after the funeral, they all went back to somebody's house that wasn't the house that they lived in. And I'm sure that I remember Astrid being there and Klaus.
Klaus says it was his first trip to Liverpool, and he remembers it made an impression. So,
Yeah.
Do you remember the actual day standing on the cemetery?
Yes. And obviously the Beatles weren't there.
No.
It wasn't about the Beatles that day.
No.
It was about close friends and family.
It was a small group.
Yeah.
Alan Williams was there as well.
Was he?
Yeah.
Do you know, I'm not surprised because I think Alan liked Stuart.
how did you view the friendship between Stuart and John?
I don't know whether I viewed it at all, really. It was just, we were all friends, you know.
Yeah. But they were very close, and you were very close with Stuart as well. Was there, Paul and Stuart, that wasn't very match made in heaven because he was jealous of his...
Terribly well. Well, I think Paul was more of a perfectionist. John would have had Stuart in the band whether he could have played or not. Paul wanted somebody who was a professional bass player, somebody that was good. And I can't blame him for that, really. Stuart wasn't a musician, not in the same terms, you know.
No. Can I ask you about the friendship between John and Stuart? Because what was the influence of Stuart on John? Did you see in his later career an influence of Stuart?
I'm trying to think. Obviously, John was impressed by Stuart's ability as an artist and also as a sort of thinker, I suppose. I think Stuart was just regarded by John as a mentor, even though he was Stuart John. No, they were not far short of the same age, were they?
4 months or something.
Yeah, not much in it. Yeah.
We mentioned it in our podcast that Stuart was like the art director of the Beatles. Could you agree with that?
Well, a lot of their look came from Stuart and Astrid. The haircut, the colours, and all sorts of stuff like that. And it's interesting in the letter that mentions Astrid, that towards the end of the letter, Stuart says he'd bought a leather coat and how much it was. And by comparison to in England, you know, in Germany, leather coats were quite cheap. So when they got back, of course, they were all in leather, weren't they? You know?
They were, yeah. I had a theory which I came up with yesterday that Astrid and Stuart were, of course, very close. And Astrid mentioned in her interview in the book that she became him and he became her. And when I read that, I thought, well, that's exactly what happened with John and Yoko later in life. John was...
An interesting comparison, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was definitely Yoko that turned John in a different direction, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I was very sad when George died. He was such a nice guy.
Did you stay in contact with John or George or the others?
Briefly at the beginning of their fame, yes. But afterwards we went in different directions, you know. I stayed in the art business.
Do you have one specific fond memory of Stuart or John?
Do you know, I'd be hard put. I'd have to think for a while about that. Of John, memories, it would be running together a number of memories of being in the crack and him sort of poking fun at people, really. You know, the people with a pipe, he'd say, oh, that's a bad tooth you've got there, governor, or something. And I mean, that was one of the reasons we were barred from the crack quite a number of times. But eventually we were given to come back. And I think memories of Stuart in my old Morgan, just going up and down. There's a Portland cement factory in Wales. And the girl I was going out with at the time, called Elsa, her father was the manager of it. And we'd get in my old Morgan and drive to this factory where we'd have parties and all the rest of it. And just the two of us in the car, you know. It was nice. And I'd regularly go up to Huyton, pick him up and we'd go somewhere.
I would like to ask about the alternative group that you formed, the Dissenters. What can you tell us about that? Because it wasn't the music group, was it?
Stuart and Bill and myself and John were good at grumbling about things. You know, the state of students' grants and where the world was going. And of course, this was the advent of really the nuclear problems. And we'd go in the crack and sit in the corner and muse about the state of the world and how we would run the art school if it was up to us. And for some reason, it appeared much later that we'd been meeting, and I think Bill Harry called us the dissenters.
It was his idea to...
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but you spoke actually to each other, we are going to make Liverpool famous or something like that?
Yes. Well, we hadn't intended leaving, you see. We'd all intended, because it was a hub of activity, all sorts of things were happening embryonically at the end of the 50s, which carried on into the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Are you still in contact with Bill Harry? Because you two are the two surviving members of the dissenters.
It's bugger, isn't it? You know, that all the people that were in the flat, John's dad, Stuart's dad, Margaret Duxbury, Ducky's dad, Rod Jones died. What was that old thing that people used to say? I used to read the obituaries every morning to make sure I'm not in it. You know, before I get up.
How do you look back after so many years?
It was one part of my life. Fortunately, you know, I've had lots of other interesting things that happened right the way through my life. I taught at the art school in Liverpool and developed the holography department. Then the Royal College of Art in London was wonderful. I was at Imperial College working on programs for lasers and things.
So you went on with your life.
Yeah,
you didn't stay in the past.
No. I mean, I've kept the mementos.
Yes.
But they're not my life.
No.
You know, I've moved on and done lots and lots of other things.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And I'm just surprised that I can remember as much of it as I can.
Can I ask you one final question about Stuart? If you had to describe him in, let's say, 3 words, how would you describe Stuart Sutcliffe?
Talented, sensitive, and fun. I think. I mean, he was very talented. He was a sensitive person. And it was great fun. You know, we had a good time. And I wish he was here. As losing your kid's brother. And I don't think anyone's been as close since, really.
Fab4Cast. Luister ook naar Fab4Cast via beatlesfanclub.nl.